Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Black, and I'm going to be taking you through today a video tutorial on the introduction to Xcode, and we're going to be looking at a slight modification of a very simple program called the Hello World program. The Hello World program, as far as I can tell, was first created in the documentation for the BCPL programming language in the early 1970s by a guy of the name Brian Kernighan prior to Bell Labs constructing the C programming language. So it's used as an introduction to a programming language and also to test whether or not a compiler or an interpreter is working properly. So we're going to be introduced to Xcode, the integrated development environment that we're going to be using with the programming language of Swift 2.0 to construct iOS apps. So our first job is to open up Xcode, and you'll notice this window will pop up. It will show past examples of programs that have already been produced. And what we're going to do today is we're going to create a new project. So as we create that project, we have a couple different options of templates to use. The one that we're going to be using today is called the single view application. It's a real basic template that has the least amount of code that's pre-built. Each one of the other options will have a little bit more code to help ease the pain of being introduced into an iOS development project. So the first thing you're going to do is you're just going to create a product name. So I'll just call this Hello World. The organization name I'll just keep with myself. The only difference that I might change down here is I want to make sure that the language is Swift, and the device that we're going to be using and deploying to today is going to be the iPhone. And when we click next, I just need to create this in a specific place. So I'm just going to make the screen a little bit larger. So this is Xcode. So Xcode is called an IDE, an integrated development environment. And what that means is that we can build code to construct an app, but we can also build and design the interface of what users would see as they're playing around with your app on a certain device. In this case, we're using the iPhone. So I'll just take you through the different components of this so that we get comfortable with talking about certain areas inside the IDE. The first right here is called your navigator window. It shows all of the documents and the files that we're using inside of our app. So we got a couple different ones that we want to talk about. App Delegate, which is built in automatically. The view controller, which we'll be talking about shortly, is connected in some way to what's called the main.storyboard. This area right in here is just your editor. So right now we'll just kind of click on view controller.swift. So if I want to edit the code, this is where I would go. If I want to edit the storyboard, I just click on the file over here and the storyboard will pop up as well. You will also have sometimes debugging information here at the bottom. So to get that displayed up here in the top right, these are the different panels that we can see. And as I click on these, you'll notice they appear and disappear. So your debugging information will be displayed here at the bottom. There are also ways to hide the left and the right if you want. You can think of, from a JavaScript background, this would be your console.log, so you can print messages to yourself. This will allow you to see the different variables that you're using inside of a program and the values that are stored inside those variables as we progress through the app. The last part over here, these are your utilities. Oftentimes we are most likely to see the utilities as I'm clicking on different things inside the user interface. The storyboard, we'll notice that there's a lot of different options up here. There's also different inspectors that we can take a look at: the file inspector, a quick help inspector, an identity inspector. The attributes inspector is one that you use quite often to style your interface elements. There's also the size inspector to change the size of different things. and also the connections inspector, which we'll be talking about briefly later on. Down here is the object library. The object library allows us to drag and drop different user interface elements onto the view controller, which is this big square right now, so that those are the things that will be displayed in the app as it's run later on. So that's where we're going to start today. We're going to add a couple of different things from the object library, make that a little bit larger, and we're going to be placing them on the view controller. So the view controller you can think of, and I'm making this very simplistic, as just a screen. So if you had multiple screens inside of an app, we would have multiple view controllers inside the storyboard. The storyboard is the whole interface sort of element, and you can zoom in and out to see how many different screens you have. Okay, so we're going to be dealing with, one screen today, so I'm going to keep it zoomed in to 100% to make it as large as possible. So the different things that we're going to be using today, the first one is we're going to have a text field. So I'm just going to drag and I'm going to drop that over here. The next thing I'm going to have is a button. Drag and drop the button over here. And the last one that I'm going to have is a label that we're going to be outputting information to that label. So the first thing you may notice is that the size of this is not a typical iPad or iPhone. It's sort of a big square, and we're going to change that so that we can display the content and the labels and the buttons appropriately for an iPhone, which is what we're going to be deploying this to today. So the first thing I need to make sure of is that I have the view controller selected, and that's what we're going to be changing the size of. So I go up here into, make sure you're in the attributes inspector. The top one is iPhone, and I'll change it to an iPhone 5. Next, I'm just going to modify some of the sizes of these, make sure they're nice and centered by using that nice blue line. Make this one a little bit larger, and my label, which we'll be displaying right here. So I can change a lot of the other attributes if you want. Feel free to change some of the colors, the fonts, the font sizes, to style this any way that you want. Today I'm most concerned just about the functionality of trying to write something in here, click a button, and then have information displayed down here in the label. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is I need to make sure that my code can talk to the different objects that we placed inside the view controller. So how do we do that? Well, every view controller will have over here a .swift file connected to that so that they can talk back and forth to one another. And as I want to change different properties of my text fields, my buttons, or my labels, I need to make sure that there is a connection between each one of these items inside the storyboard as well as my .swift file. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to click on this little guy right here, which will open the Swift file right next to the interface builder, the storyboard. If you want to hide this panel right here, we're not really going to need that today. I can just click on this guy and it sort of just collapses that panel. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a connection between the text field that we added up here at the top and my code. So you can hold down Control on your keyboard and click and drag over, or you can right click and you'll notice a little blue line appears and we simply drop it. Typically when we add these connections, we want to make sure that they're added at the very top of the class file, so above the functions that you'll notice were already pre-added into this class. But we want to make sure that they are inside the class. The class begins with this left brace right here, and the end of the file, the end of the class, finishes right here with this right brace. So we have a couple of different options that we can use. The first is that we can create this connection, and there are typically two types of connections that you want to make. There is a third one here that we probably won't be seeing in any of the projects that we're going to be dealing with. So the first one is an outlet. And you can think of an outlet as creating a variable for the object right over here in the interface builder. So that's the one that we're going to be using for the text field. We'll see the action one later on. So we're just going to keep the connection right now as an outlet. We have to give it a name. So we want to give it a name that is very specific based on what this text field is doing. So I'm going to call this name text field because we're going to be adding, a person's going to be typing in their name into this text field, and then we're going to be modifying and changing that information later on. So the next thing I have to do, I'm just going to leave the type as a UI, a user interface text field, because that's what this object is, and we'll keep the storage as weak right now. And when I press connect, it creates a little variable for me with the name text field. Now the great thing about this is this connection that has just happened in between our storyboard and the Swift view controller file that is connected with it is that we get all of the different properties and the methods that are actually built into a UI text field. That means if I click on the storyboard again, I can modify all of these directly inside my code, which is pretty sweet. Now, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the functions that are pre-built in. So the first function is an override function because it's inherited from the UI view controller class. You don't need to worry about that too much right now, but this is the first function that is called when we load the program. So when this view controller gets loaded, this function will then be called as soon as it's loaded. I'm going to delete the comment right here, and you'll notice that that we use the 2 slashes as well as JavaScript and many other languages to create comments for ourselves. So the first comment that I'm going to make is I'm just going to print something to the console down here. And we're just going to see when is this message printed. So there's a built-in function in Swift 2.0 called print, and I'm going to print a message saying the view controller was loaded. Now in Swift, we have the option of adding semicolons at the end of every line that's executed, but Swift also allows us the ability not to write those. So I'm just going to keep this as is right now. Now to run the program so that we can see this in action, I'm just going to press the little play button up here, and what I want you to do is I want you to watch when the screen comes up, when the view controller is loaded, and then you'll see the message pop up right here. And it's loading. And okay, so it still hasn't popped up yet because the view controller hasn't loaded yet. And once you see the text fields, the buttons, and the label, we should see right there. The view controller was loaded. So this is a great place to debug your programs, that you can print different comments to yourself. You can print the values of different variables just to check what's happening as your program is progressing. So that's number one. So that's a nice little option that we have, that we can always use this debug right here. Think of it just as your console.log that you're just going to print messages to. I'm going to stop the program, and now we're going to be doing some action. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to be entering information in here because I want to ask someone to enter their name. And we're going to print out a little message to the person, whoever wrote their name inside of there. So I'm going to access the name text field up here at the top. So this is the name of the variable. And remember, we get all of the properties of this variable, of this object that we can start accessing. So when the view loads, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press name text field, and what you'll notice is any variables that are built into this Swift file automatically come up, and I have the option of pressing tab, which takes me to the next camel case. It'll find the next capitalization letter, or I can press enter if I'm already selected the one that I'm after. So the property that I'm after right now is the text of the text field. So if I put a period, it then gives me this option of all of the different methods and all of the different variables that correspond to this text field over here. So the variables, you'll notice background and background color, we can change those directly inside of our code. The variables are with this green V. The methods, the functions that correspond to this guy are in purple. So the one I'm after is text, and you'll notice that a text has the variable type of a string with this little question mark. The question mark we'll discuss a lot later, that represents an optional value. The optional value says that this text could have a value or it may be nil. It might not have anything stored inside of it. So we are going to assign a value right now using the single equal sign. And what we're going to place is enter name here, which is a pretty descriptive message on what they should do. So if I run the program again, when the view loads, we should notice that the text field now has a string inside of it. So there's a little problem right now. If I click inside of this and I want to type my name inside of this, I got to delete all of this stuff, and that's a pain in the butt. So what we're going to do is when they click inside of this, we're going to delete that automatically so that they can start typing their name right away. It'll just save the users a little bit of time. So I'm going to stop the program. And what we're after this time is an IB, not an outlet, but now we're going to be creating an IB action. The IB action is a function that happens when an action occurs inside our interface. So when users are clicking or touching with their fingers different buttons or text fields, we can make certain things happen. That's exactly what we're going to do right now. So we're going to create another, I'm right-clicking and dragging over here. I'm going to be creating, this time, an action and not an outlet. You'll notice that there is another little pop-up that happens this time. I have to give it a name, and this is a function, so I'm going to say text field pressed. We're going to keep this, actually we're going to change this to a UI text field. And the event that happens, I have a drop down here of all of the different events that happen. Quite honestly, I'm not quite sure which one it is. I know buttons use touch up inside, so I'm going to guess that that's the one that we're after right now. So when someone touches this text field inside of the blue rectangle, I'm hoping that this function will be called. So when I press that, I'm just going to expand this a little bit, give myself some room to type inside of. So, what do we want to do? Well, we want to change the text of the name text field object, this guy right here, and I want to load an empty string. So I'm just going to say name text field dot text equals empty string. So the empty string, you'll notice, is two double quotes next to each other with nothing inside. And that will delete all of the different stuff out of this text field in our user interface. So let's test it out, see if it actually works. So I'm going to run this again. And when I press this, okay, nothing happens. Something should have happened, but this is a great sort of learning opportunity. What I think probably happened is that wasn't the correct function that I chose right away. Okay, so there's going to be a couple things that we're going to be working through. This is actually a real good opportunity to show some common mistakes that happen. So the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to create what's called a breakpoint. A breakpoint represents, I'm just clicking right beside the numbers that are listed here. It will stop your program dead in its tracks, and this is a great way to debug, to see if we're actually hitting this point, or to see what the variables, and they would be displayed down here inside the debugger. and to see what the values of variables are at certain points inside of our program to make sure they're changing appropriately or the way that we're expecting them to change. So I'm going to run the program again, and if I hit this line of code, the program will stop dead in its tracks. Now, I'm not expecting that to happen this time because I don't think I chose the correct function. So when I click here, when I'm touching it up inside, it isn't actually working, okay? The program did not stop. It did not jump back to the code. So what that tells me is that I probably just chose the wrong function here, which is totally fine. It just means I'm going to have to create another function. So I'm going to right-click. I'm going to create another action because someone's going to do an action over here, and it's going to be connected to our code over here. I'm going to say text field pressed 2, I guess, just to show the difference between text field pressed function. And I'm going to choose, let's think, probably touch down would make sense. And I'm going to just create the UI text field and connect it like so. All right, so let's copy this code. And we'll paste it inside this function, and we're going to put that debugger. I'm going to delete that one, and I'm going to put this breakpoint right back here so that if I do hit this line, it will stop the program dead in its tracks. And you, oops, sorry, I went a little bit too quickly there. So what you'll notice is that it actually did. It sort of stopped and it broke the program, and we're now sitting on this line. Down here, we'll notice that we have a bunch of different variables. Don't worry too much about these ones, but if you were to create your own variables, we can take a look at the different values of those variables, and it's still printing to our console down here, just logging the information that we want. So I'm going to stop the program. So that tells me that we actually got the correct function this time. So here's a common mistake that happens. Okay, I realized that this function right here was not the correct one, so that just means I'm going to delete it. However, we have to realize that we made a connection between our interface builder, the storyboard, with our script. And when I delete the script, this guy right here still thinks that that connection is there. So if someone did actually get that touched up inside to work properly, it's going to jump over here looking for that code, looking for that function, and it's going to crash the program. So we have to make sure that we delete that connection. And the way that we do that is I make sure that this guy is highlighted. And over here in that connections inspector at the very end, I will notice all of the different connections that I've created between the storyboard and my script that is connected, the view controller script. So I can see right away that I have 3 different connections. I have touch down. This is the one that we just created. The name of the function, if we could see it expanded, would be text field pressed 2, which is this function here. The touch up inside, which did not work, is trying to look for a function over here called text field press, but I just deleted that. So I need to make sure I click the X here, which deletes the connection and will not crash your program in case you were to do that. The referencing outlet is the name of the variable that we give this object so that we can access it later on. The name text field here is this line right here. So that's all good and great, and let's run the program this time without the breakpoint, just to see that when I click on that text field, it should delete the string enter name here. So I click once, and now it's gone, and a user can type in their information. Okay, so what's next? Well, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back to the interface builder, and I'm going to click on the button, and I'm just going to give a little bit of a better name, a message here. So just underneath the title, this is what's being displayed, the string or the text that's being displayed. So I'm going to just say click me. And when I press enter, you'll notice that the interface builder, the button here, its text changed. The label, I might do that with too. I'm just going to delete it, keeping an empty string in there so we don't see anything until we want something to show up. So what I would like to have happen is for someone to enter their name here and then click this button, and then a little message gets displayed here. So what that tells me is that we need a couple more things. I need to create a function which handles the action of clicking the button, and I also need an outlet for my my label here at the bottom so that we can write to that. So the first thing I'm going to do is right click and drag over here just above the viewDidLoad function. We need to create an action for our button. I'm going to call it button pressed, which is the name of the function. I'm going to keep the event touch up inside because I know that is the correct one for a button, and I just press connect. And there we go. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an outlet for this label right here. I'm going to keep my outlets connected together. I'll call this label message. And what I want to have happen is when I press this button right here, it jumps into this function, the IB action, the interface builder action for that button. And I want to do a couple things. I want to grab and make sure that I have the name that someone typed in here. So I'm going to be storing that inside a variable. Now, I'm going to say var, and I'm going to call this name is equal to the name text field dot text. I'm getting the text property from the name text field, which is this guy right here, that object, and I'm storing it inside of a variable. Now you'll notice this little warning pops up and it basically says you created a variable but you're never using that variable. Okay, we will be using that variable later on. In fact, we're going to end up changing the name of the variable, not the name of the variable, but the type of the variable from var to let so that it's a constant value because I'm not actually changing the name. Once I have it, the name will always be the same. But for right now, we're just going to keep it as is. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm going to take that name and I'm going to output it in a little message right here. So what I'll say is label message. This is where I want to put it. Sorry, it's kind of annoying, so I'm just going to move that down. Label message dot text is equal to, and I'll just say hello space plus and the variable name, which is this guy right here. Okay, so you'll notice, all right, there's a little error about this. And what it's saying is that this right here is an optional, and I need to unwrap optionals. It basically says that this variable right here, because we got it from the text field, could possibly be nil. There might not be anything inside of it. So when I created that variable, I know I have information inside of it. So what I need to do is I need to add an exclamation mark, and that exclamation mark essentially unwraps the variable to display the content inside of it. Right? So I'm just going to insert at the end of the variable an exclamation mark. Now you'll notice now there's a little warning up here. And that warning is going to say something along the lines of, you have this value, you stored it, but you never change it, so maybe it shouldn't be a var, it should be a let. So I'm going to replace the var with a let. If you're changing the name later on, you would definitely want to keep it with the var association at the very start. All right, so let's run the program and see what we get this time. So what should happen? Well, we should see a little enter name here displayed inside of our text field. When I click, we should see that disappear. When I type my name and press the click me function, I should get a little message displayed. And that's pretty much it. Pretty simple program. Shows you the connection between the interface builder, your storyboard with your code, making connections of the type outlet and actions. But there's one last thing I want to show you. Swift uses something called string interpolation. And string interpolation says that we don't necessarily always have to add variables outside of the string. We can do it directly inside. So to do that, what we use is the backslash and parentheses and place the name of our variable, which is actually name in this case, inside of that. We still need to unwrap this because it is an optional type, so I should have the exclamation mark, but I'm going to show you what happens if I forget that exclamation mark. So when I run the program this time we will use string interpolation. I type Mr. Black, click me, and now it says, hello, optional, Mr. Black. This optional is because I forgot to unwrap the variable, which was an optional type. So I need to add that exclamation mark back in, run the program, and all should work properly. All goes well. Hope if I can spell and press click me, and now we get the proper string output. And that's pretty much it. So this is your first introduction to Xcode, Swift 2.0, how to use the interface builder to build stuff, how to connect it inside the view controller class, the code or the script that's associated with that, what optionals are, the different types of functions that we can use, the ones that are pre-built inside. All right, so this is a great little tutorial called the Hello World tutorial, although we did modify it slightly to get a program to run.